Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Great Women in Compliance podcast hosted by me, Lisa Fine, and Hemma Lomax. Today, we're spotlighting the ACI's 42nd Annual Conference on the FCPA and Global Anti-Corruption, taking place this December, the first week in Washington, D.C. We have two great women here who are speaking to tell us more about themselves, their work, and the conference. We have Sandra Moser, who's the partner and co-chair of the Global White Collar Practice at Morgan Lewis, and former chief of the DOJ's fraud section, and Kim Parker, partner at WilmerHale, co-chair of their white collar defense and investigations practice. So thank you both so much for being here. And before we start talking about what you're doing now in the conference, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you got into compliance? Sandra, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Hemma and Lisa, for having me. And I always welcome the opportunity to see my friend and colleague in the bar, Kim Parker. So great to be here. And yes, so as you said, my current place in the world is as a partner at Morgan Lewis and a leader of our global white collar practice, which is sort of ever growing. I've been at Morgan Lewis for over 5 years now, after spending most of my career in public service with the DOJ. I was an AUSA out in the field in the District of New Jersey. One of my former colleagues just elected governor there the other day. So good for her. And then I came down to DC on what I thought might be a temporary assignment way back when, and I never left. And I had the good fortune of holding a lot of leadership positions, including the chief position of the fraud section, where compliance became an increasingly important piece of the work that we were doing with a lot of corporate criminal investigations. And so that was really sort of eye-opening and door-opening for me in terms of gaining expertise and knowledge from many others who had more than I did for certain at the time in the world of compliance.
And Kim, what about you?
Sure. And thanks also for having me, and always great to be with Sandra. So my story is I am a Wilmer lifer. I have been at the firm for 27 years. I am one of the pretty few partners in our white collar practice who was never a prosecutor. I like to say I'm a true blue defense lawyer, have always been on the defense side. But I think what's really strong about our practice and makes the day-to-day very rich is I partner with my colleagues who were prosecutors. And so we can bring to clients that experience of having really been on the defense side for decades, as well as having sat on the other side of the table like Sandra has. The way I came to the compliance and investigations world is I came to the firm. I was a young associate. I had no idea what I wanted to do, came from a clerkship, started to just sort of dabble in different things. And I had an incredible mentor here at Wilmer, someone who was sort of the dean of the FCPA and compliance bar, Roger Whitten. He's been retired for several years, but I got randomly assigned to a case with Roger, and he was an incredible practitioner, brilliant lawyer, someone who really taught me how to serve clients, but also taught me how to be practical and helpful in a compliance space, and really working with clients to help them get to yes. Sometimes you have to say no, but the goal is how can we do this in a way where we reduce the risk and let you meet your business objectives? And that was something that Roger was incredible at, and it was something that he really taught me.
I love that, Kim. We love when you share stories of who mentored you and who helped you up, because especially in the Great Women in Compliance community, it's a really important part of how we all rise together. I know Lisa and Mary wrote a book called Sending the Elevator Back Down. And I love that he sent the elevator to you, and I'm sure you've done that for many at WilmerHale. So lovely to see you. Lovely to see you, Sandra. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to turn to the ACI's FCPA conference in DC. I think it's happening in next month at the Gaylord National at National Harbour. When I was coming up at the SEC, even as an intern, it was a staple on my conference circuit. It's one of my favourite places to go, particularly because people like you lead these things and speak at the events. So I wanted to ask you, why is this such an important event in the anti-corruption, anti-bribery, white-collar space? And what can we expect from the agenda this year? Kim, I know you're co-chair. Let me start with you.
Sure. I think ACI has developed, and it was one of the first conferences in this space. Sort of when I talk about being involved 27 years ago, at the beginning, there were not many conferences in this area, and ACI was in on the ground floor. But because of their long history, it really developed as sort of the go-to gathering place for practitioners in this space. It's sort of, if there's one conference you're going to go to where you will be guaranteed to see your colleagues at other law firms, see colleagues internationally, see your clients from in-house, and then also, given that it is in DC, it is close to the government, all the government speakers are typically there, and it really becomes a gathering place for networking and sort of hearing the latest developments. And I think it's gained that reputation because year after year, we do see people prioritize, this is sort of the one conference that they're going to go to.
And it really is that, isn't it? It's not just government speakers, but a collection of in-house counsel, external, outside counsel, and government speakers coming together. I think it's a wonderful community, and I've definitely benefited myself. Sandra, what about you? What are you excited about on the agenda for this conference?
Yeah, look, I would echo so much of what Kim said about the conference, and it really does get into the weeds, and I think that is reflected in the agenda. And it's not just sort of main stage. They do that, which is very helpful to hear directly from the leaders about what's on the horizon, what's happened over the last year. But, they do so many breakouts now that have a lot of bespoke topics and areas of coverage that reflect, frankly, not just the challenges in compliance, but the complexities of the FCPA itself, which is one statute. But as Kim and I both know, there are a lot of complexities and not a lot of case law out there. And so we grapple with a lot of really interesting topics and hearing different perspectives on them. So they really sort of roll up their sleeves and don't just sort of repeat the same topics every year, but really try to keep their finger on the pulse of what people want to hear about, what are case developments, and I think an ever-growing presence of foreign practitioners and regulators as well. I really noticed that last year, and so I think that we're going to see a lot of that this year. And so the agenda reflects talking about issues that certainly extend beyond the U.S. borders.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, for me, I work at a company that is dual listed in both the US and the UK. So as somebody who's been working in compliance, ethics and compliance there, I'm really excited to hear Nick Afgrave in the Serious Fraud Office, because this has become, a really interesting time there and time for our life. And I think with both of you speaking at the conference, one of the things, Kim, that you're speaking about is how the U.S. and global priorities are evolving, how are companies reevaluating our resource allocation. And I was wondering, what are some of the big shifts you're seeing today and how the companies are prioritizing anti-corruption efforts?
Yeah, I'm really excited for my panel. I'm going to be on a panel with 3 in-house compliance officers, all of whom are really grappling with what seems to be a bit of a shift in law enforcement priorities, at least in the US, and thinking about how do they sustain the investments that they've made in their programs, the enhancements that they've made in a time of at least perceived reduced enforcement, and whether they can maintain the focus and priority that they've put on their programs amid pressure from business leaders, maybe the perception that this isn't the highest priority. And I think a lot of our clients, Lisa, I'm sure you're seeing this, are grappling with, it's easy to make compliance a priority when the view is that there is a lot of enforcement and there's a huge amount of risk. There might be the perception now that's less the case, at least in the immediate term. And does that mean you can take your foot off the gas, or really do you have to think of this as a long-term investment? And so I think that's something we're going to grapple with on our panel. And I'm really happy to hear some benchmarking from other companies and clients about how they're adjusting to this period.
Yeah. It is a really interesting time, and I think Hemma and I we all grapple with it, and within the community of in-house practitioners as well. I do think that being an ethical company always remains important. I think people will talk about that, but I think focusing on it more about doing the right thing than laws is one thing, but that's a kind of just one little thought. But more than that, what are you seeing, or from either your panelists or others, that they're doing this with some innovative or cross-industry approaches that are helping them grapple?
I'd be interested to hear from others, but I know a big topic this year is going to be AI and is going to be technology. And how do we leverage technological resources to make our compliance programs smarter, to make them go further, to really focus on areas of highest risk and move away from things that are less risky but may be resource intensive? All of our clients are grappling with that. And I expect that's going to be a huge theme of this conference. I know they have a whole kind of pre-conference workshop on this, but my guess is every panel is going to discuss this. And it's something we're hearing, and I'm sure you're hearing from your clients. How do we use these technological resources to make our compliance program stronger and to make sure we're focusing on the highest risk areas?
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Kim. This is that time, isn't it? I remember when I was at the SEC, even a decade ago, data analytics was the thing, and how you could look at insider trading, and the government was always thinking about what they could do technologically and then raising the bar of expectations for the industry. And gosh, now it's on supercharge, and certainly we can all expect to see our programs transform radically with the technology available. I think you're right. The benchmarking piece of the conference is going to be fabulous because we're all going to be able to learn from each other. And I'm sure the government representatives will be listening as to what's possible now, what's the art of the possible, and what should we all be expecting we can do. Sandra, you are leading a session focused on operating in China amid shifting geopolitical tensions and shifting priorities for the current administration. So a little bit of a turn there. We focus a lot on FCPA, but what's happening in China and what should we be worried about there?
Yeah, I mean, I think China is a through line probably for this conference. Maybe not, what are we at, 42? I don't know that. And I would actually be really interested to see the agenda from one of those early conferences, if they've got that on ice somewhere, because it is quite a display of longevity. But yeah, this is sort of, different, stepping outside of our borders, and a lot of things, of course, as Kim was alluding to, that are going on here. China, I think, continues to be an issue for a lot of companies in this administration, similar to sort of the last time around under President Trump. There is a sort of even more heightened focus on China, the companies, individuals, and the compliance challenges, I think, remain, and they've been compounded by an intensified effort that we've been seeing on the part of more local regulators in China to escalate their anti-corruption enforcement under various laws that they've got there. And so heightened scrutiny on bribery, et cetera. Some might say here, there's sort of a less scrutiny, at least as with respect to domestic companies, according to the policy. We'll see whether that plays out truly in reality. And I think that's difficult, and I see it presenting a huge difficulty and challenge to clients in that while they're ramping up, there are, of course, in a country the size of China, there is some inconsistent and uneven regulations that deal with sort of in the ABAC space. And there's many different layers of local, regional, and sort of the federalized layers of law enforcement that can sort of just walk into the company and say that they're conducting an investigation and expect sort of cooperation. And the blueprint for that there is, as it is in many different countries that have bespoke rules with respect to privilege and the way that investigations are conducted, that's something that you really need to understand, and I think we're lucky enough to have offices in Beijing and Shanghai, and have our colleagues who are well versed not in the FCPA, but of course in what's going on in the ground there as well. So that the ambiguity that sometimes causes is, one, there's ambiguity in the laws themselves, that it's like, how can we be compliant if there are different types of regulations at every different level? And then the ways and approaches that differ, that those regulators take at different levels, and how you're supposed to engage with them, that really can be a challenge to try to make sure that you are covering the waterfront. And then layer on top of that, depending on where the company that you're representing is headquartered, can this be confined to China? And you wish and hope that it could. Not that there's a lot of cooperation, right, between Chinese regulators and the US. That becomes a challenge, of course, as well, is to try to figure out, is this really cabined? Is one going to see something else? It's very difficult to predict how the Chinese will handle matters. They can go and detain people, and then you don't learn about it for a really long time. And so it's just a different animal. And so I think it's really helpful to have that sort of face and that concept of face that they have in China. Make sure that you've got that on the ground to facilitate navigating all of these issues.
And Sandra, it's intimidating to your point, right? There's a plethora of rules and overlapping, maybe even conflicting compliance issues that we've got to deal with. I guess we'll never be out of work on one argument, but certainly one thing I was excited about when I heard about DOGE using AI to potentially rationalize some of the conflicting and overlapping regulations that are out there. I wonder if that will happen globally as well. I can only wish.
Right. Yeah. If they do, we hear maybe the last to hear about it out of China, but again, great to have the colleagues on the ground because there are layering upon all of those sort of substantive laws and regs about whether it's about like T&E or something much more serious, a lot of data privacy and cybersecurity issues that are extraordinarily complex to have to try to navigate. And the regulators are penalizing. We've seen some penalties against foreign companies for transferring their own data to their headquarters in another place. And that's tough, right? That's a tough thing to try to navigate when you have, as we all know, not every company's, even the most sophisticated ones, have systems that are all talking to each other and one worldwide beautiful touch of a button. So those additional things that the Chinese are focused on are just adding more and more complexity to what's already a very difficult market for foreign companies to operate in.
That's right. Well, sticking with the theme of foreign enforcement regimes, Kim, you'd mentioned that you're seeing a lot of representatives of foreign regulators at the conference. It's certainly a melting pot of regulators that are interested in anti-corruption enforcement. And certainly, again, back in my time, the cooperation element was really strong. This interagency cooperation element was strong. And those jurisdictions were wanting to learn from the robust enforcement regime we had here. How is that looking now? We still obviously have the FCPA, it's still law, but are the regulators still going after corruption enforcement cases? What's the landscape out there for us? Are there changes in the compliance laws globally that we should be now thinking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am seeing in my practice a continued amount of enforcement outside the US. We have very active matters in Switzerland. The OAG has been extremely active. The SFO is still active. We've seen activity in France and a number of other places. So I do really think it's important to recognize that this is a global phenomenon, and the US is not the only policeman on the block these days. And it really is something that has been built over decades, an interest and a capability to pursue these cases. I still think there is cooperation. What I think might be different is just the level of resources, focus, and attention right now in the US in this area. And what I want to hear more about at the conference when we hear from some of these global regulators is how much are they prepared to sort of step into what might be a bit of a resource pullback in the US. That has always been what the US brings to the table, the ability to just put huge amount of resources. And I know, Sandra, when you were at DOJ, the number of prosecutors dedicated to this area is significantly higher than what it is right now. Doesn't mean they're not bringing cases. It doesn't mean they're not bringing impactful cases, but we just know that the resource level is different. And what I'll be looking forward to hearing at the conference from some of our colleagues outside the US is how much are they able to step into that gap? And that's something that we don't really know yet. They are working hard. They are bringing these cases. They do have interest in these cases, but that resource gap is something that usually the US is able to fill.
And Sandra, what's your advice for your global clients that are having to deal with these other enforcement regimes when it comes to anti-corruption?
Sure, that really hasn't changed, right? I think it's so fact dependent and regulator dependent. They are all very different. The regimes have different defenses, and there are new faces in some of those agencies certainly as well that come in with a particular agenda. So I think in terms of, as Kim was saying, in terms of filling the gap that may be perceived or exist because of a lower diminished focus, at least as being articulated publicly, and actual diminished resources, I think, which may be temporary. It just takes time, right? These investigations take a long time. The US was always criticized for taking a long time, but I will say, I think even the US was faster than a lot of the foreign counterparts. And that's not like a direct criticism. It's gathering evidence overseas, wherever your home base is, really challenging. And there's all sorts of different rules and mechanisms and privilege distinctions that are different everywhere. And I think companies, usually the playbook is to try to drag it out. And it's one that I agree with. I think mostly that's a better tact, not always, but so things take a lot of time. And so to really see, is the proof in the pudding, or some of these coalitions that France and the UK may be partnering up on to sort of step into an apparent breach going to manifest real results? I think it's just going to take time to see what comes out of that. And advice is, even with respect to the US, the statute of limitations is 5 or 6 years, and then it can be told for another 3 years, right? That's going to outlast this administration. It might not outlast like a diminished view of the FCPA. Like, we'll have to wait and see. But, really, this sort of circles back to something that Kim said in the beginning, taking your foot off the gas completely because of something that is situational right now with respect to compliance or how you may interact with other regulators is not wise.
Couldn't agree more. And honestly, what we do in this moment when there is maybe diminished enforcement is actually quite telling, right? This is the moment where we can make sure we've got a foundation strong and ramp up. So I love that. Over to you, Lisa.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention about what you both all were just saying is that American companies, when the gap is being filled by other countries, many of whom were dragged into some of being forced to be stronger enforcers and other things because of the US program. I also think US companies may in a way become more of a target because of that as well, and I think it's also important to remember that regardless.
The current policies too are also sort of point to, can someone else deal with this? Like that you prosecutors are supposed to be thinking about that. And so in a way, whereas in the past, it was if there was any minor data point or jurisdictional hook, right? It's we've got this. And then it became more collaborative and all of that. And let's not pile on. But now they're sort of saying like, do we have to do this, or can someone else deal with this? Another domestic regulator that may be civil, or why don't we let the people whose country it is or where the company is headquartered try to vindicate their own interests and we can stay out of it? So that is a real sort of shift. But I agree with you in terms of, I'm sure the French would love to prosecute a US company.
Yeah. So with that, just a little change of topic. It's my first time attending this particular conference. I've been to a lot of the other ones that are fabulous within the ethics and compliance field, where there aren't as many of the white collar bar or the attorneys. So I'm very excited to really hear it from this viewpoint. As a first time attendee, do you have any tips for me or other people that can't miss, or things or ways to navigate this that might be different or significant?
I would say fight the urge to panic if you haven't done your Christmas shopping, because you're going to be in the middle of a Christmas village at this. Personally, I fight the urge since I became a mom, because I've been going to this thing for a long time, whether with the government or on the other side, that I feel guilty as a mom that I'm not bringing my kids to the ice skating rink and all of this. It's a funny sort of place and time, but in seriousness, just try to get really to as much as you can. There's a lot of networking to be done. There's a lot of familiar faces and friends that you'll bump into. But I really will say, there's something to be truly learned at every single session because they are so thoughtful and take a lot of time to consult with outside practitioners and in-house folks about what do you want to hear about, and then bringing together people who really have a much deeper understanding of the topics than you might see at some other conferences where the conversation is a bit more surface level.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And yeah, there's a very exciting Christmas light show that you'll get to see. But I will say the conference can be a bit overwhelming. It's very large, but that's also its strength because at any given moment, there's something interesting going on. And it can be overwhelming because they double track. They have things can be going on simultaneously. And you'll think to yourself, wait a minute, I want to go to both of these things, but they're actually at the exact same time. But there are the breaks in between panels. So if you miss a panel, you've got the opportunity to see those panelists during the networking breaks. And so you're able to kind of catch up and be able to get the perspective of the speakers and others at all of these events, even if something is double tracked and you can't get there. The other thing I would say about this conference is, maybe more than any other, everyone in the audience is an expert. It's not just the people on the dais. And that is what's incredible about this conference. There are some beginners, but most people are people like yourselves who have been in this space for a long time, who could probably sit on every panel. And so your fellow attendees can be an incredible resource. And people do ask questions. People are interactive in a way that maybe they might not be at other places because almost everyone there is an expert.
A really good point. Yeah. So there's a lot of incisive questions and discussion that occurs not just during the sessions, but as Kim said, outside in the hallway. Last year, I remember I was talking with a former DOJ colleague, and we're out in the hallway, we're looking up SCOTUS, like Supreme Court decisions, talking about a point that followed on to something we saw, and we're all type A, have to do it right there and then in the moment. So I learned something great in the hallway. So there's a lot to see and do for sure.
I love that. It's going to be such a treat for all of us to be together there. I'm looking forward to it with you. And you're right, Sandra, if it gets too much, there's always a coffee and hot chocolate, I suppose, with Mrs. Santa Claus.
Village, literally.
It's
yes.
right there in the atrium. Yeah, wonderful. Look, gosh, we could spend hours speaking to the two of you. So many great insights. I wanted just to really close out and ask you one parting question. Maybe have you got any parting thoughts for this great women in compliance community who are coming up in the compliance world, trying to find their way and navigate? Just like you said, Kim, that you had mentors that supported you at Wilmer. Any advice or tips for our great women in compliance community as parting thoughts? Kim, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would just say I've been impressed to see the evolution of this community. In the early days, when I first started, when I went to this conference, there were not many women. But now women are huge participants and leaders in the compliance space and are people that we can all learn from. I always find women to be very open, very willing to give up their time to mentor other women. And honestly, this conference is a place where you can make connections that are helpful for you, whether you want to benchmark an issue within your company, whether you have a tricky issue with a joint venture. There's always going to be some woman who's willing to give her time to talk about, here's how I dealt with a similar issue. And this is really a great space to meet the other women in the field.
Yeah, and Kim really said it and said it well. My immediate thought was that this is a community, unlike a lot of other professions, and to some extent, the legal profession itself, where someone can work at a competitor company, but I see professionals more and more coming together to do that benchmarking and saying, I'm dealing with a tough issue. Can you help me? And coming up in the government where you didn't have to bill hours and all of that, and you had the luxury of being able to go to someone's office and say, I really need to talk this through. I feel like that exists across different industries, and certainly even within the same industry across different companies, where there's a willingness to come come together and do that and share thoughts in a sort of safe, confidential space that doesn't exist among in a lot of other spaces or a lot of other places in the business. So I see that continuing to grow and evolve, and I really love that.
I love that too. I think it was 16 years ago when I first went to the ACI conference in DC at the Gaylord. And
They refused to move it.
That's right. And I can attest to what you said. There's definitely been an evolution, Kim, Sandra. Also, what a warm, sharing, kind, generous community this has been. And it really did spark, I'll say it sparked my interest in this area, in this profession. So thank you for what you both do to create that community and to contribute and give it back, pay it back and send the elevator back down. We're so grateful that you could take the time to join us today on Great Women in Compliance. We can't wait to see you at the conference. And for our listeners,
looking forward to seeing you in December.
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly. We'll see you in December. If our listeners haven't heard about it, we'll put something in the show notes about the conference. You can at least check out the agenda and see who's going and what they're talking about. Even if you can't make it, you know who's talking on what, and you can reach out to them outside. And with that, thank you from Lisa and I. Thank you from Corporate Compliance Insights. We'll see you next time.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.